Intro upbeat, aggressive drum beat hits narrator. Look closely at the financial skyline of Shanghai. Rising over the muddy banks of the Huangpu River, amidst the glittering hyper towers of East China's economic engine, stands a silent, glass-stripped monument to absolute engineering hubris. 60 stories of reinforced concrete, topping out at exactly 204 meters into the humid coastal air. It was supposed to be the ultimate address for the ultra-wealthy, known on the luxury real estate market as One Seaport Horizon. Located at 161 Binhai Avenue, 80 ultra-luxury sky mansions, priced from 8.5 million yuan to a staggering 130 million yuan for the multi-level penthouse crowning the summit. The market went into a frenzy. Before the concrete pump trucks even finished the lower structural core, 71 of those 80 elite units were completely sold out. Down payments were locked into escrow. Millions of yuan changed hands. And then, the music stopped. Sound effect. Deep, resonant drone. Drop today. The elite buyers are completely locked out. Construction elevators hang frozen against the gray concrete flank. Massive panels of heavy exterior glass have been systematically stripped away from the facade, leaving a gaping, hollow skeleton that sways violently in the seasonal typhoon winds. But it's not just unfinished. It's moving. The locals in the financial district don't call it One Seaport Horizon anymore. On Chinese social media, it has earned a far more terrifying nickname, the Banana Tower of Shanghai, because this 204-meter megastructure is not simply out of plumb. It is visibly, measurably bent. And the reason it is bent is the single most damning piece of evidence hidden deep within the municipal construction archives. The curve running through the midsection of this skyscraper was not an optical illusion. It was not a cosmic accident. The twist was a deliberate, desperate engineering gamble executed in real time to cover up a catastrophic structural failure happening under the soil. They tried to lean the building back to fix a sinking foundation. It failed fast-paced, driving investigative music in Welcome to Document Number 4. The 161 Binhai Avenue file is officially open to understand how a trophy high-rise for Shanghai's elite became a multi-million yuan structural nightmare that may have to be completely demolished via controlled implosion. We have to look at the players behind the blueprint. The ambitious developer behind the project was the Fuxing Property Group, a high-leverage player that acquired this tight, prime waterfront plot back in 2013 for a jaw-dropping 450 million yuan. Their projected total sellout on those 80 luxury units? A massive 1.9 billion yuan. To execute the vision, they hired the renowned Huaxia West Design Institute as the architects, and for the critical structural engineering, they retained WSP Global's East Asia division. Mark that name down. WSP is the exact same engineering giant currently embroiled in intense structural litigation over the notorious cracking facades and severe sway issues at the ultra-thin luxury towers in neighboring high-density districts. File number 2 in our investigative series, the primary contractor tasked with pouring the concrete was a premier international joint venture firm, Pisarati China. Heavy equipment rolled onto the Binhai Avenue site in early 2015. The hype was real. The marketing promised a new dawn of waterfront architectural luxury, but the entire catastrophe was already pre-programmed into the earth before a single mixer truck arrived. The story of this engineering disaster doesn't begin in the sky. It begins deep in the dark, compressible muck of an old river delta, where a single 42 million yuan executive decision sealed the fate of a multi-billion yuan tower. Fed out, music on a tense tone. Sound effect. Drilling noise, underground subdue narrator. Every massive high-rise standing along the historic financial waterfront of Shanghai faces the exact same geological adversary, the soil. The bedrock beneath this sector of the river delta sits deep, roughly 15 to 20 meters down, buried under centuries of soft, waterlogged alluvial silt, river mud, an unstable historic landfill that has been packing tight against the coastline since the Qing dynasty for over a century. The non-negotiable engineering standard for building tall on this waterfront has been crystal clear. You do not build on top of the mud. You drive massive, heavy-duty steel or reinforced concrete friction piles straight down through that unstable landfill, piercing the soft silt until they lock deep into the solid, unyielding bedrock below. By doing this, the entire immense weight of the skyscraper bypasses the squishy topsoil entirely, resting securely on rock. Every iconic tower surrounding 161 Binhai Avenue was anchored this way. It isn't an experimental technique. It is the absolute baseline requirement for structural integrity in a river delta. But as the 2015 construction launch approached, the executive board at Fuxing Property Group looked at the financial spreadsheet .music Q. Tense. Rhythmic synth, according to subsequent forensic litigation filed in the municipal courts. Fuxing decided to cut a massive corner underground. Instead of taking the costly, time-consuming path of driving deep-bore piles all the way down to bedrock, the developer opted for a controversial shortcut known as soil improvement, specifically deploying a technique called high-pressure jet grouting. The concept behind jet grouting sounds elegant on paper. You drill array holes into the muddy soil and blast liquid cement grout at hypervelocity directly into the earth, mixing the cement with the existing mud in situ. The goal is to artificially stiffen the soil, creating a hard, dense block of mixed earth, a simulated foundation pad, without having to spend the massive capital required to reach actual solid rock. Tenal construction audits later revealed that this critical engineering pivot saved Fuxing Property Group approximately 42 million yuan, roughly 2.2% of the entire projected project budget. But here is the devastating detail that transforms this from a calculated business risk into a smoking gun of professional negligence. The specialized geotechnical engineering firm originally hired to analyze the Binhai Avenue site, RA Geoengineering Corporation, had issued an explicit written warning during the blueprint phase. Their report stated plainly that driving piles to bedrock was the only reliable method to guarantee stability, predicting that with a traditional pile foundation, the building's future settlement and lateral movement would be completely negligible. The bedrock path was the scientifically proven route. The jet grouting path was the cheap route. The cheap route is the one they poured. Sound effect. Time lapse whoosh, fast forward to 2018. The structural concrete core of one seaport horizon had rapidly shot up past the 40th floor. The construction cycle was running at breakneck speed, with hundreds of migrant workers pouring floor plates week after week. That was when a senior surveyor for the general contractor noticed something chilling on his digital leveling equipment. The building was moving, but it wasn't settling straight down deep beneath the surface. The artificially stiffened jet grout soil foundation had encountered an uneven pocket of soft river silt. Under the immense accelerating weight of thousands of tons of curing concrete, one specific northern corner of the massive concrete foundation mat began to sink faster than the others. It was a classic case of differential settlement. When a foundation shifts even a fraction of a millimeter at the subterranean base, that microscopic tilt is amplified exponentially as the building climbs higher into the sky. By the time the concrete crews reached the upper tiers toward the 60th floor, that tiny basement shift had rippled upward, throwing the entire vertical axis of the skyscraper completely out of plumb. The structural core was leaning exactly 76 millimeters, 3 full inches, directly toward the north. To a layman, 3 inches across a towering height of over 200 meters might sound like a minor variance. You might think a heavy concrete tower can just handle a slight tilt. But in the world of high-rise engineering, absolute vertical plumb is not an aesthetic choice. It is a structural law. Think about the mechanical anatomy of a modern skyscraper. The high-speed elevator arrays must travel through vertical concrete shafts that are perfectly straight. If the shaft tilts, the elevator cables misalign, the guide rails bind, and the emergency braking systems trigger automatically, rendering the lifts completely useless. Then look at the exterior. The glass curtain wall is manufactured off-site in massive, perfectly flat, rigid structural glass panels. These panels are engineered to hang precisely on a grid that is perfectly perpendicular to the earth. When the concrete skeleton behind those panels leans out of plumb by 3 inches, the structural anchors misalign completely. On a 60-story tower exposed to high-velocity maritime winds, a glass panel that cannot be properly locked into its engineered anchor points ceases to be an architectural component. It becomes a multi-hundred-kilogram missile. waiting to shear off and drop 200 meters onto a crowded Shanghai-sized sidewalk. Music drops low. This was the exact moment of catastrophic panic. The engineers and developers at Fuxing realized they had a multi-million yuan disaster on their hands, and the luxury buyers were already demanding tours of their units. They needed a fix, and they needed it immediately. What they did next will go down in the annals of bad engineering history. Instead of halting the project, tearing down the misaligned upper levels, and executing a massive underpinning operation at the foundation, the construction management team made a secret, rogue decision to fix the lean while continuing to build upward. As the concrete forms were set for the remaining upper floors, crews were instructed to deliberately alter the geometry of the edge forms, angling the newly poured upper floor plates slightly in the exact opposite direction, biasing the structure southward to counteract the northern tilt. The desperate theory was that by bending the top half of the tower backward, the overall center of mass would pull the summit back directly over its basement footprint, straightening out the building's profile in mid-air. The actual reality? They didn't fix the lean. They just bent the building. Music cue. A self-serrating tense beat. When the tower finally topped out at 60 stories, it wasn't straight. It had morphed into a permanent structural curve. The skyscraper leaned hard to the north at its lower midsection, then aggressively corrected back toward the south at the upper levels. It was a permanent architectural. The structure was no longer a straight column designed to cleanly transfer gravity loads downward. It was deformed floor by floor, the structural distortion baked permanently into thousands of tons of reinforced, cured concrete. There was no mechanical jack on Earth that could push it back into alignment because there was no single direction to push. The deformation was structural, historical, and absolute, and as the structural crisis deepened behind closed doors, the pressure on the ground was about to explode into a matter of life and death. Fat on a single, reverberating ACRD, sound effect, distant siren, low industrial narrator. To fully comprehend the sheer scale of the crisis unfolding at 161 Binhai Avenue, you have to look past this single perimeter fence. This is not an isolated incident. Across the rapidly expanding urban landscapes of East China, the race to build higher, faster, and cheaper has left behind a trail of structurally compromised concrete skeletons. The Banana Tower of Shanghai is part of a systemic pattern of high-rise hubris that mirrors some of the most notorious structural failures in the country's modern construction boom. If you are a student of heavy engineering disasters, this pattern should feel terrifyingly familiar. Music QE. Drifting. Dark ambient track. Consider what happened further inland in the high-density metropolis of Wuhan. Engineers there are still studying the files of a massive 55-story residential development that suffered a nearly identical foundation failure during its rapid framing phase. Just like the Binhai Avenue disaster, developers bypassed deep-pile mechanical anchors in favor of an accelerated, low-cost soil compaction method to hit their aggressive quarterly delivery targets. Within 18 months, the unequal compaction of the subterranean clay layers triggered an immediate, localized differential settlement. The entire tower began drifting off its vertical axis, cracking the structural transfer beams on the lower 3 levels before the Municipal Housing Bureau intervened and permanently halted the project. Or cast your mind to the coastal metropolis of Tianjin, home to one of the most stark warnings in architectural history. There, an ambitious commercial megablock project topped out into the clouds, only for surveyors to discover that the massive concrete foundation mat was experiencing deep lateral shearing. The building wasn't just settling downward. It was creeping horizontally due to the unstable water-saturated ground conditions near the port. Millions of yuan were pumped into specialized chemical grout injections beneath the basement slabs in a desperate attempt to freeze the movement. It didn't work. Today, that multi-billion yuan development stands completely abandoned, a ghost tower wrapped in litigation, slowly being reclaimed by the coastal elements. But perhaps the most striking parallel to the bizarre geometric distortion of the Shanghai Banana Tower can be found in the historical records of the Lotus Riverside Development Complex in Shanghai's own Minhang District. Sound effect. dramatic metallic clang in that infamous structural catastrophe, an entire 13-story residential block didn't just lean. It experienced a total catastrophic foundational failure, toppling over completely intact onto its side like a dropped toy. The subsequent forensic investigation conducted by the China Academy of Building Research unmasked a fatal sequence of soil mismanagement. Workers had excavated a massive underground garage on one side of the building while piling the excavated earth up to 10 meters high on the opposite side. This created an immense asymmetrical pressure differential across the soft mud foundation. The lateral forces completely snapped the hollow, non-bedrock concrete piles beneath the structure, causing the tower to fail instantly. The fundamental physics governing the Lotus Riverside disaster are exactly what caught up with the engineers at One Seaport Horizon on Binhai Avenue. When you treat the soft shifting alluvial soil of a major river delta as a secondary concern, gravity always collects its debt. When WSP Global and the design teams at Washia West looked at the 76mm lean growing on their Shanghai skyscraper, they should have looked at the Minhang district files. They should have realized that trying to outsmart a shifting foundation by structurally altering the geometry of the upper floor plates is an act of engineering desperation that physics will always punish. In a standard high-rise, gravity loads travel straight down through the vertical columns, compressing the concrete evenly into the foundation mat. But when you introduce a deliberate structural curve into a 204-meter-tall tower, bending the upper 20 stories in the opposite direction, you completely disrupt the calculated load paths. Instead of clean axial compression, the skyscraper is suddenly subjected to massive, unintended bending moments and lateral tension forces. The concrete on the inside of the curve is crushed under extreme compression, while the reinforcing steel on the outside of the curve is stretched to its absolute engineering limits. The building becomes a giant, loaded concrete spring, locked in a permanent internal civil war against its own mass. Sound effect. The rumble of a distant typhoon wind, and this brings us to the most terrifying reality facing the Shanghai Municipal Construction Commission. A building that is straight and experiences normal settlement can be evaluated using standard structural models. Its behavior is predictable, but a 60-story reinforced concrete tower that is actively leaning to the north at its base, while aggressively hooked back to the south at its summit, represents an unprecedented structural anomaly. Every year, during the violent summer typhoon season, the high-velocity winds screaming off the East China Sea slam directly into the wide, curved flank of this half-finished skeleton. The aerodynamic forces exert a massive twisting leverage, a torsional load, on a foundation that has already proven it cannot hold a straight line. The structural files are clear. The pattern we are watching unfold at 161 Binhai Avenue is the exact same pattern that has paralyzed multi-million yuan projects across the nation. A single, short-sighted financial compromise made deep underground triggers a chain reaction of structural failures that eventually reaches the sky, transforming a premium piece of real estate into an unfixable, dangerous liability. If you want to understand the devastating human cost of this 42 million yuan gamble and how the crisis inside the concrete core quickly spilled out into an absolute tragedy for the workers on site and the families who bought into the dream, we have to look at the internal safety logs. Fade on a tense, reverberating mechanical drone. Sound effect, heavy industrial metal mesh rustling in the Wien narrator. Long before the public ever caught wind of the structural lean, long before the first social media posts began pointing out the bizarre banana-shaped curve in the Shanghai skyline, the deep-seated instability at 161 Binhai Avenue was already extracting a brutal human toll behind the high-perimeter fencing. The chaotic rush to outpace a shifting foundation creates a high-pressure, corner-cutting environment where structural integrity isn't the only thing that gets sacrificed. In late 2017, as the site supervisors frantically tried to track the uneven millimeters of settlement, a tragedy struck that tore through the corporate secrecy of the Fuxing Property Group. A 34-year-old migrant construction worker from Anhui Province named Chen Wanhao was working on a temporary staging platform on the 29th floor. The site was chaotic. scheduling pressures were mounting as the developers tried to outrun the building's compounding physical deformities. In the rush, basic safety protocols were catastrophically bypassed. Chen slipped through an unshielded, non-compliant opening in the edge framing, falling 29 stories directly onto the concrete staging area below. He died instantly. Music. Somber, driven electronic pulse. The subsequent forensic investigation launched by the Shanghai Municipal Bureau of Housing and Urban Rural Development exposed a culture of absolute systemic negligence on the site. The specialized concrete subcontractor, an aggressive high-rise framing outfit operating under the name Huashi High-Rise Construction, was found to have intentionally bypassed mandated edge protection systems and falsified daily safety logs to maintain their breakneck pouring schedule. The fallout was swift. Huashi High-Rise later pleaded guilty in a municipal court to charges of corporate manslaughter directly tied to the fatal safety failure, and was forced to pay heavy restitution to Chen's devastated family. The Municipal Construction Commission slapped the project with a flurry of immediate stop work. Citations. The cranes froze. The concrete mixers went silent. But every time the site was shut down over critical safety or structural concerns, it wasn't just time that was slipping away. The building itself was physically running out of options. By the time 2019 rolled around, the Cold War between the primary contractor and the developer burst out of the boardroom and spilled into the open public record. The joint venture contractor, Pizzarati China, officially pulled the plug. They filed a massive scorched earth lawsuit against Fuxing Property Group in the Shanghai Higher People's Court, demanding a total rescission of their construction contract. Sound effect, paper pages slamming down. The legal documents filed by the contractor unmasked the true, terrifying dimensions of the skyscraper's internal crisis. The lawsuit alleged that the structural core had suffered an unprecedented, irregular settlement of up to 76 millimeters at the foundation mat, throwing the entire 204-meter concrete frame 3 full inches out of plumb toward the northern perimeter. Pizzarati China stated plainly on the record that this severe deformation was the direct, unmitigated consequence of the non-bedrock jet grouting decision forced through by the developer before the contractors had even broke ground. They argued that the building was fundamentally unstable, making it an existential hazard for the thousands of construction workers tasked with completing it, and an absolute death trap for any future residents who might move inside. Fuxing Property Group fired back with an aggressive media counteroffensive. They issued a fierce public statement calling Pizzarati's lawsuit patently false from start to finish, a desperate act of commercial extortion, and nothing short of corporate defamation. The developer claimed that their own roster of independent structural consultants had thoroughly vetted the Binhai Avenue site and deemed the concrete core completely sound, dismissing the massive physical curve as a minor, easily rectifiable construction misalignment issue. But the developer's corporate narrative was instantly shattered when a second, elite engineering powerhouse stepped into the fray. Sound effect, digital radar pinged the contractors brought in the Shanghai branch of Thornton Tomasetti, globally renowned forensic structural experts, to conduct an independent, high-precision laser scan of the tower's geometry. What their sensors uncovered sent shockwaves through the local housing bureau. The tilt wasn't stabilized at 3 inches. It was getting progressively worse. The independent engineering audit revealed that the structural core was now leaning by more than 101 millimeters. 4 full inches. And this was before the immense secondary weight of an occupied building had even been factored in. The tower was completely empty. It had no internal plumbing infrastructure, no massive mechanical HVAC plants, no heavy interior stone finishes, and none of the hundreds of tons of luxury furniture that 80 elite families would eventually bring inside. One of Thornton Tomasetti's most senior structural engineers issued a stark, chilling warning in an internal memorandum that was leaked directly into the litigation files. He wrote that the persistent, ongoing lateral movement at the summit of the tower, month after the structural concrete had topped out, strongly indicated that the subterranean long-term soil creep behavior was far more severe than anyone had calculated. The shifting ground was not stabilizing. It was actively yielding under the pressure. The engineer warned in explicit, formal prose that additional unpredictable structural deformation would inevitably occur the moment finish work resumed. Music drops to a low, threatening hum. Look closely at that specific warning. That single sentence is the most damning and important piece of evidence in the entire 161 Binhai Avenue archive. It means this skyscraper is not a static object that settled into a permanent flawed position that engineers can simply measure, reinforce, and accept. It is a dynamic, living hazard. A building that has shifted and completely stopped moving is a structure you can at least analyze, patch, and underpin. But a 60-story concrete giant that is still creeping, still drifting millimeters at a time, years after the last bucket of concrete was poured, is an engineering wildcard whose ultimate final position nobody can guarantee, desperate to keep the project alive and protect their massive capital investment. Fuxing cut ties with Pizzerati China and brought in a local, high-speed contractor known as Ray Builders. The mission: force the building across the finish line by any means necessary. Ray Builders tried to execute an incredibly risky, highly unorthodox architectural hack. They realized that because the concrete skeleton was bent like a bow, the standard, flat fabricated glass curtain wall panels could no longer be mounted to the structure using the original blueprint coordinates. So, they undertook a massive, frantic engineering redesign of the entire exterior facade. Every single aluminum mullion and structural anchor point had to be custom shimmed and geometrically offset to create a deceptive outer glass shell that would appear straight to the casual observer on the street, masking the twisted concrete monster hiding right behind it. Sound effect: glass shattering distantly. The fix lasted for only a matter of months. By the middle of 2020, as the custom glass installation reached the mid-sections where the concrete bend was most severe, the immense structural stresses began to tear the facade apart. The misaligned anchor points began transferring massive, unintended twisting forces straight into the rigid glass frames. On-site engineering logs reveal that the panels began cracking under the pressure, failing to seal against seasonal downpours. Fearing a total catastrophic delamination of the facade, crews were forced to go back out onto the exterior rigs and systematically strip large sections of the expensive luxury glass right off the building's face, leaving the upper 20 floors completely naked and exposed to the elements. And that is exactly when the final, fatal omission came to light in any hyper-tall skyscraper built along a high-wind maritime coast. Engineers install massive internal stabilizing mechanisms near the roof, heavy-tuned mass dampers or specialized slosh stabilizers. These systems use massive blocks of steel or vast baffled tanks of water, designed to counteract the building's natural tendency to sway violently when hit by typhoon force winds off the river. But according to internal municipal reporting, because the upper levels were completely snarled in structural redesigns and escalating contract disputes, the advanced slosh stabilizers for one seaport from Mach Horizon were never actually installed or calibrated on the upper floors. Music cue: aggressive, pulsing climax beat. Think about what that means. For years now, this half-finished, 204-meter concrete skeleton has been standing completely abandoned in the heart of one of the densest financial districts in the world. It has no exterior glass to shield its interior columns. Its foundation is slipping through waterlogged. It is permanently bent out of plumb, and it possesses absolutely no functional damping system to control its lateral movement. Every single time a major storm cell screams off the East China Sea, this 60-story monument to executive greed stands completely exposed, swaying unchecked in the gale force winds, throwing massive twisting stresses down into a foundation that was already fundamentally broken before the first floor was poured. The physical structure is completely trapped in a state of suspended animation. But on the financial and human side of the ledger, the disaster has triggered a multi-billion yuan structural collapse of a completely different kind. Fat out. Music on a high-tension wall of sound. Sound effect. Wind howling through hollow concrete core narrator. as the half-finished shell of one seaport horizon stands exposed to the changing seasons along Binhai Avenue. The physical rot inside the concrete is perfectly mirrored by the financial catastrophe tearing through the local real estate sector. The 161 Binhai Avenue file has laid bare a legal and financial quagmire so dense it threatens to permanently swallow the capital of everyone who ever touched it. Today, this 204-meter architectural anomaly is completely frozen, locked tight within a paralyzing web of high-stakes litigation. The municipal courts are jammed with simultaneous, warring lawsuits. The developer, Fuxing Property Group, is locked in a bitter legal battle against its former international general contractor, its current engineering teams, and the state-backed consortium of institutional lenders who have long since cut off the flow of credit to the site. But the most devastating human fallout of this disaster lands directly on the shoulders of the 71 wealthy families who thought they were purchasing a piece of the Shanghai dream. Music, QE, low, seismic synth pulse. These buyers weren't just standard real estate investors. They were elite professionals, entrepreneurs, and families who handed over massive, life-altering sums of cash as down payments for sky mansions they will almost certainly never be permitted to step inside. Under the rigid structures of the pre-sale condominium market, their capital remains completely trapped, buried deep in the frozen bank accounts of a construction project that has been legally designated a structural hazard. They cannot move in, they cannot reclaim their hundreds of millions of yuan in deposits, and they cannot sell their stakes because the asset they poured their futures into has effectively been rendered worth less than zero. So, what is the ultimate endgame for a 60-story reinforced concrete skyscraper that is actively leaning, permanently bent, and stripped of its exterior glass? Independent forensic engineering teams consulted by the Municipal Housing Commission have run the math, and the conclusions are absolutely brutal. There are only two possible paths forward for 161 Binhai Avenue, and both of them represent an unprecedented financial and logistical nightmare. Sound effect, metallic echoing. Metron, the first option, is a comprehensive structural intervention known as structural underpinning. To pull the Banana Tower of Shanghai back into safety compliance, specialized engineering crews would have to excavate entirely beneath the existing basement slabs, while the 60-story concrete mass stands directly above them. They would be forced to manually drive massive, heavy-duty hydraulic jacks into the earth, cutting through the failed jet grout soil improvement layers to somehow anchor new, high-strength micropiles all the way down to the actual bedrock that should have been used a decade ago. Once those piles are locked into the rock, engineers would have to carefully lift the entire multi-thousand-ton concrete tower in microscopic increments, attempting to arrest the northern settlement and stabilize the lean. The cost for an engineering operation of this extreme structural complexity. Recent municipal construction audits indicate it would easily require a 9-figure budget. We are talking about a minimum of 720 million yuan just to stabilize the foundation and fix the lean of an incomplete skeleton whose total projected sellout value for the completed building was only 1.9 billion yuan. When you add the cost of completely re-engineering the custom glass curtain wall, replacing the degraded internal concrete structural columns, and installing the missing slosh stabilizers, the mathematics of a rescue operation break down completely. It is financially impossible. It would cost far more to fix the tower than the building would ever be worth on the open market, which leaves the Shanghai Municipal Construction Commission looking down the barrel of the only remaining realistic alternative, full structural demolition. Sound effect, DEP. Low freaks explosion rumble. But how do you safely demolish a 60-story, reinforced concrete megatower sitting on a razor-thin urban footprint in the middle of one of the densest financial centers on Earth? You cannot simply load the core with traditional commercial explosives and execute a standard controlled implosion. The building is located just 2 blocks away from the heavily traveled East River waterfront, surrounded on all sides by hypersensitive municipal subway tunnels, high-voltage utility grids, and operational luxury skyscrapers. The intense ground vibrations triggered by dropping 204 meters of solid concrete all at once could easily destabilize the delicate water-saturated soils beneath neighboring towers, creating a catastrophic domino effect through the financial district. The only viable way to tear down the banana tower would be a painstaking manual top-down deconstruction. Workers would have to mount heavy-duty cranes and specialized concrete-munching excavators directly onto the roof of the 60th floor, systematically crushing and cutting away the structure floor by floor, section by section, transferring thousands of tons of high-altitude debris down a tight internal elevator shaft over a period of years. It would be an incredibly slow, immensely dangerous, and unimaginably expensive undertaking, an operations budget that neither the bankrupt developer, the frozen lenders, nor the municipal government has stepped forward to fund. And so, the tower stands. It has become, in the words of an executive director at the China Academy of Building Research, a permanent, silent monument to what happens when short-sighted financial manipulation collides with the unyielding laws of physics. It was engineered to offer breathtaking, uncompromised panoramic views across the glittering river. Instead, it stands as a hollow, twisted warning to the entire global construction industry. A 670-foot monument to a 42 million yuan mistake, music reaches a dramatic, intense crescendo. The single most damning detail of the entire 161 Binhai Avenue archive will always be this. The correct answer was entirely known before the first truck ever arrived on site. The elite geotechnical specialists at RA Geoengineering Corporation had put their findings down on official paper, outlining the precise bedrock pile requirements necessary to guarantee absolute stability. The blueprint for total safety was sitting right there on the executive boardroom table. But to save a mere 2.2% on the total estimated construction budget, the leadership chose the cheap route. The cost of that 2.2% savings was the life of a worker, the criminal conviction of a subcontractor, the complete freezing of hundreds of millions of yuan of family capital, and a 60-story skyscraper that is currently bending under its own weight, waiting for a typhoon to decide its final position. The 161 Binhai Avenue file is closed. The next engineering disaster file is already in production. Turn on notifications and stay sharp. Fat on a sharp, metallic hit.